So folks, my name is Shane Krauser, and again, I'm coming at you live from Gilbert, Arizona, born and raised in this area, and I'm gonna tell you a little bit about myself here in just a moment. But here's the deal. We know that we live in interesting times, in some uncertain times from many people's perspective, and liberty is always a concern. Public safety is always a concern. My biggest concern is rule of law and ensuring that the rule of law operates at a high level where freedom can be protected. And so I want you to know that in light of all that's going on throughout the world, not just in the United States, we're talking about worldwide, there are issues going on. I want you to know that as we move forward together, that I believe the sun still shines on America. I believe it's preparing to move up and shine on countries all over the world, whether you're talking about Canada, whether you're talking about countries in Latin America like Peru and Mexico, whether you're talking about Europe, whether you're talking about Asia. There is something unique going on right now. It feels as though there is a groundswell movement going on throughout the world where it's unique in this regard. Typically, when you see freedom movements come about, they are typically isolated to particular parts of the world. You can look at the American experiment as an example. That was pretty unique in this part of the world. You didn't have freedom movements necessarily sprouting up all over the world. It was pretty unique here. And what we're seeing right now is something that in my study of history, in my study of movements, leads me to believe that this is especially a unique time where folks, I've been able to travel all over the world moving the message of freedom. Just recently, 6-7 months ago, I was down in Peru, did a 3-city tour down there talking about liberty, talking about the American Constitution, talking about limited government, and some of the principles that are enshrined in that Constitution. I've been up to Canada. I've traveled through Canada. Of course, being an American, I'm very concerned about what's going on in my own homeland. But I believe it's unique what's going on, that the sun is truly rising, despite what the media might be telling you. If you're listening to the media and that's your barometer for what's going on, man, we're gonna switch something up today to help you realize that the media very, very rarely has their finger on the pulse of what's really going on, because there's a groundswell going on. There's no question about it. If I'm listening to the talking heads, Fox News, CNN, MSNBC, to get a sense of what's really going on, those things are just symptomatic. They're reporting almost after the fact. What about what's going on the offensive side? And that's what we're going to talk about tonight, really, is, what does real freedom look like? And how does freedom operate within a political system that is put together to protect the inherent liberties of you and me? What does that look like? I hesitate to say, what does good government look like? Instead, I want to say, what does a good system look like that's designed to protect liberty? We're going to walk through all of that tonight. And my hope is this: by the time we're done here this evening, I believe you'll understand more about this Constitution, this ruling document, than well over 95% of the folks in our culture today. I really believe that. And man, I just put the huge burden on my shoulders, and I believe I'll satisfy that burden here shortly. But I want to talk about some events leading up to the drafting of the Constitution, and then I want to go through a few principles that I think are key. Now, many folks sent me messages leading up. I think we started promoting this thing 2 weeks ago, and I was getting all kinds of messages. Hey, Shane, are you going to talk about this issue? Are you going to talk about that issue? This webinar is not put together to address specific issues. I may do some webinars here in the near future where we're talking about specific issues. But here's what I believe. If you understand the ground game, if you understand what real liberty looks like, which is what we're going to talk about today, you can evaluate any issue out there and come to what I believe is the right conclusion. So when I hear people say, well, Shane, are you going to discuss that issue? Well, what issue? There's all kinds of issues going on. There's all kinds of free exercise issues going on throughout the world right now that are infringing on religious liberty. There's all kinds of issues going on throughout the world infringing on free speech, infringing on freedom of assembly, infringing on the right to bear arms, infringing on how government's treating individuals that they're accusing of some sort of wrongdoing, right to a fair trial, a right to a speedy trial. All of these issues are going on. So which issue do we address today? You see my point? There's a lot of issues going on. I want to just talk about groundwork. I want to talk about foundation. And as we do that, there's two things I'm going to hit on. Number one, I'm going to talk about the Constitution. I'm going to talk about this ruling document, and you're going to understand some of the inner workings. The second thing I want to talk about as we go through is almost as kind of a side note. I'm going to kind of squeeze this in as we go along, and that's some of the divine underpinnings. My personal belief in studying the founding era, in studying what happened in the drafting of the Declaration of Independence, what led beyond that with the Articles of Confederation, and ultimately the drafting of the Constitution, I think that anybody who studied that can come to no other conclusion than there was divine intervention, that God was working in some interesting ways to bring the right group of people together to solidify ideas that have simply worked. Now, I don't mean to suggest that it's worked perfectly. It certainly hasn't. Why? Well, we're people. We're human beings. Human nature, right? Kind of, we find that little loophole, we step into that loophole, and man, liberty goes a-tumbling. So there's some of that going on. But we're going to talk about both of those things, the overview of the Constitution, and we're going to talk about some of those divine underpinnings. But let me tell you what I believe is the problem. Because why don't we start there as if we're going to provide a solution? The problem is not the President of the United States. It's not Trump. It's not Obama. It wasn't Bush. It wasn't Reagan. It wasn't Kennedy. It wasn't Wilson. That's not the problem. And the problem is not Congress. The problem is not the U.S. Supreme Court. The problem is not your local mayor. It's not your local dog catcher. It's none of those things. The problem is us. Because when you're talking about freedom and you're talking about the Constitution, these things cannot defend themselves. You have to have an engaged and enlightened people that understand what freedom looks like in order to hold individuals accountable if you're going to have a political system designed to protect freedom. You can't just put together a political system and say, well, let's see how freedom does here. It'll never work, right? You and I have studied history over thousands of years. You've never seen something like that happen. In fact, where there's no political system, tyranny always results. Tyranny always comes about. Oligarchies always emerge, right? Always. And so we have something unique going on in that regard. So that's a big part of the problem is us. But let me give you a couple of examples of real world examples of where I think we're going in terms of our thinking. So I taught constitutional law, and criminal justice for 15 years at 2 different colleges in Arizona. And every semester I would issue an assignment in my constitutional law course for the students to write on a particular issue, right? I want you to write on a free exercise issue that's going on today. I want you to talk about free speech and what's going on in this particular protest where individuals were arrested and it was taken all the way to the court. I want you to evaluate that. I want you to talk about Second Amendment. So I would give them a topic, they would submit back to me. And I'll never forget, I had one paper, one semester, where the paper started this way. Too many people take the USS Constitution for granted. I had to chuckle a little bit, but it kind of made me a little bit upset. The USS Constitution, mind you, this is not a boat, it's a ruling document, right? So we're on board with that one. Here's a more, an example that hit a little bit closer to home for me. So I was a prosecutor for 𝗪𝗵𝗲 County Attorney's Office in Phoenix. I did that for 12 years. I spent a good part of my career in the gang homicide unit. I enjoyed what I was doing. I enjoyed trying cases. I enjoyed being in front of juries. I enjoyed being in the fight to help people find closure in the midst of being victimized. And one of the last trials that I did before I retired, which I'll tell you about here in a moment, we were selecting the jury. And the jury selection process is a very intense process. Of course, if you've ever sat on a jury and gone through that jury selection process, it's a pretty boring one from your angle. But from my angle, it was one where, man, you had to be on top of things. You were watching every movement. You were trying to find what book was that juror carrying in? What were they reading? You tried to size up philosophy by virtue of what they were reading. So there's all this stuff going on. And then we start to dismiss jurors. And what happens is the judge starts to dismiss these jurors in the presence of jurors that are still on the panel. Now, in Arizona, that's illegal. We won't go into all the details on why that is. You should just know that in Arizona, when you're dismissing jurors that have been found to be unfair and cannot be impartial in sitting on this jury, that they'll be dismissed. right? They're no longer a part of the panel. But the one thing that a judge can't do is dismiss them while all the other jurors are sitting there. And so the judge starts to do this. And I said, Your Honor, may I approach? I approach and I said, Your Honor, you can't do this. If you're going to dismiss jurors, it has to be outside the presence of all the jurors, where you might call in one and let them know they're dismissed. And she says, well, Mr. Krauser, here's what we're going to do. We need to get this show on the road. Go sit back down. And I said, Your Honor, I'm not going to sit back down. What you're doing is in violation of the law. And it's right here. Here it is right here. And she says this to me. She says, Mr. Krauser, you can go put your little rule book down and let's get this thing going, or I'm going to hold you in contempt. Now, this is what's going on right now. This is what's happening, where you have individuals that you and I have elected into office at all levels of government saying, it's just to put your little rule book down. There's nothing relevant about that for me that I need to be concerned about. That's what's going on. And that's a concern. So we're going to talk about how do we go out and really do something about this. And so let me tell you a little bit about my background as we move into this. So again, I live in Gilbert, Arizona. I'm married. I have 6 children. In fact, I'm going to show you here on my screen give you a little insight here. There's my, that's not my family. That's the Capitol. There's my family. I've got 6 children. I've been married for 26 years. My oldest is 23. My youngest is 11, 5 boys and a little girl on the tail end. And we're passionate about liberty. It's something that we've dedicated our lives to. It's something that we teach our kids. In fact, at least once a week, we're sitting down with our family and talking about a principle involving liberty. We want our kids to be actively engaged in the cause. We want them to understand the special experiment that they're a part of and that they should be involved in upholding it. And so we've done some fun things with our family over the years. In fact, one of the greatest traditions that we've engaged in as a family is every Christmas, on Christmas Eve, we go up into northern Arizona to find snow. And we tell them the story. They've heard it many, many times, but we do it every year. We remind them of what happened on Christmas Day, 1776, when Washington stood on the shores of the Delaware River with 2,500 troops. 2,500 troops. Just months before, he had 25,000. And so you got 1 in 10 has the courage to be with Washington on Christmas Day, 1776. A third of those troops had no shoes. They had wrapped their feet in burlap, and they would cross the Delaware on Christmas Day and capture about 800 professional Hessian soldiers. This was a big deal because it revitalized the legitimacy of the revolution, because for so long, Washington and his troops are engaging and then retreating, engaging, getting their tails kicked, and then retreating. And this was one of the first times during this war where it was a sound victory. It was sound. And so you have this aura of confidence that comes about on these troops. And so we take our children up to the snow and we take off our shoes and socks and we run through the snow. And I've had some of the most moving experiences with my children just by virtue of that experience. Being able to sit down and talk with them as they tell me, Dad, I'm freezing. Listen, this is what courage feels like. This is what it feels like to defend something bigger than you. You have been called to do something great with your life. You've been called, you're a citizen here, a part of a special experience. You've been called to do something special. And so we do that every year as a reminder of here's what it feels like. In fact, when we come home on Christmas, we in Arizona, I realize it's not all that cold, but still, you know, our swimming pool will get down into the 50s. I know we're wimps out here, but still it's a little bit chilly. And we jump into that pool with all of our clothes on. See, guys, here's what I believe. If this document's going to come alive again, these are the types of things that we need to be doing with our children. And I know here tonight, we've got individuals from all walks of life here. We've got individuals that are just out of high school. We have individuals that are in college right now. We have newlywed couples on here. And we have individuals that have been around the block a time or two that have been involved politically. We have individuals that are lawyers and doctors on this call. So my approach is really to be holistic in nature. It's to be holistic and try and touch you all in a certain way to help you see maybe more than ever the relevance of this document and the special document that it is. By the way, what you're seeing on that screen is one of those pictures of us being up in northern Arizona, standing in the snow. And you'll see my boy standing to the left of me. He's looking over to the right, giving me that smirk. Like, Dad, you're the only one that doesn't have your feet in the water. And this was true. It was I just had to look good for the picture, but they caught me, right? And this was just this last year. All of us out in the snow, just creating memories, right? We believe as a family that we were called for such a time as this. So with that said, let me go back here, and I took that PowerPoint off. Let's go back here. And I want to ask you a question. I want you to think about the fact you're getting ready to board an airplane. And as you board the airplane, you talk to the pilot and you ask the pilot, you say, hey, have you gone through the checklist? And he says, excuse me? And you say, have you gone through the checklist? Man, I'm looking forward to getting from Arizona to New York. I'm just curious, have you gone through the checklist? And he says, listen, I'll drive this plane. I'll fly this thing. And if there's an issue that occurs en route to New York City, I'll take care of it then. I'll check out the checklist then. I believe there's no question in my mind that you're not flying. You're probably not flying with someone that probably would be as flippant about the checklist as that, right? I've been on small planes with buddies, and I'm always giving them a hard time. Hey, you gone through the checklist? Right? Man, you're going up 30,000 feet in the air, man. I want to make sure that you've gone through the checklist. Here's what's happening right now in America. We are putting people in office that have no concept of what the checkbook looks like. They have no concept of what the rule book looks like. And then we expect liberty to thrive. That's just not how it works. And we talk about politics and what's going on there, but here's my belief. I believe politics is downstream from culture. You can't just be focused on what's going on politically and hope that the next president, your next congressman, your next mayor, your next city councilman is suddenly going to be the answer man, and now freedom's going to flourish once again. I promise you it won't happen that way, because politics is just a reflection of the culture. What you see going on in politics right now is a direct reflection of what we're doing culturally. When you have a people that's rather flippant around about the Constitution, we will elect people by and large who are flippant and nonchalant about the ruling document. When you have a culture that embraces freedom, that sees the power of the ruling document, that sees it more than just parchment paper, we will begin to elect individuals into office that will do exactly what they've taken an oath to do. But until that time, my belief is we're putting the cart before the horse. I'm not suggesting don't go to the ballot box. We should be showing up there every 2 or 4 years, right? Making sure that we're letting our voice be heard. My belief, though, is that's not where we should be devoting most of our energy. We should be involved in the movement of enlightening the masses. Why? Thomas Jefferson said it best. He said, enlighten the people, educate the people, and tyranny will vanish like evil spirits at the break of dawn. Educate the people, and tyranny will vanish like evil spirits at the break of dawn. Because when you educate people on these fundamental principles, they can now be effective guardians of the ruling document. They are now in a position to hold individuals accountable. And you don't look like you're the square peg in the round hole, because that's right now what's going on. You go onto social media and you watch people talk about the Constitution. You watch people talk about freedom. Oftentimes those people are blackballed, right? They're ostracized. They're told they're crazy. Get with the times. Though that's what's going on. See, that's a reflection of the culture at large. This is what's going on, and it really is problematic. So with that being said, let me give you a summary of our ruling document. The Constitution is not a convoluted document. It is not a complicated document. I mean, our 5-6-year-old children going through our schools should have no problem understanding this. Attorneys and judges don't have a monopoly on this thing. In fact, it's the attorneys and judges that make it more difficult than it really needs to be. See, here's the 2 underlying principles of our Constitution. Men and women are born free, and men and women with power cannot be trusted. Listen to me. If you understand this, if you grasp those 2 principles, you understand the overarching idea behind the Constitution. It was designed to ensure that you and I, who were born with inherent liberties, remain exactly as we were born, right, with those liberties. And then next, that we have a document designed to protect those things. But the other principle is men and women in power can't be trusted. That's exactly why we have a ruling document. It is not that good people don't go into office, that we're not electing good people into office every now and then. That's not what I'm suggesting. I'm just suggesting that individuals who oftentimes are given power do some interesting things. They do some really interesting things. Libido dominandi. Libido dominandi. It's the lust for power. Human beings or otherwise, you can meet some great people and you put them into office and you're like, what happened to him? What happened to him? And so what is so unique about this Constitution? Because I want you to understand, this is not just parchment paper. This Constitution is unlike any other political instrument written in the history of the world. In fact, our Constitution is, again, it's older than any other political instrument that's being used in any other country in the world right now. Brazil has had 8 constitutions since the 1820s. Afghanistan has had 5 constitutions in the 20th century alone. Poland has had 7 constitutions since around 1920. Russia has had 4 constitutions since around 1920. And France has had 15 constitutions since our one. What is different about this document? Well, that's what we're going to be jumping into. But first things first, we talked about the 2 overriding principles of the Constitution. Men and women are born free. Men and women with power can't be trusted. So what is the Constitution? It's simply this. It's a complex maze of booby traps designed to stop tyranny. I'll say that again. The Constitution is a complex maze of booby traps designed to stop tyranny. Well, what do I mean by that? Well, the purpose of the Constitution was to ensure that liberty was protected and that individuals that we put into office who would take an oath to uphold the document would take as their primary oath to defend the life, liberty, and property of their constituents, of the people. That was their job. And so the Constitution, again, in principle, hey, this document's supposed to protect liberty. But then I elect individuals to go in and do just that job. And when they don't do that job, the Constitution is supposed to be both a sword and a shield. It's a document that can knock down those people who don't uphold their oath. But of course, when I say knock down those people, I'm talking about you and me holding them accountable. Do you see how this works? I can elect people, that's fine. But just because I elect people, my job is not done. My job is just beginning as a citizen. So here's the question that continues to rise up throughout our culture. I hear it all the time. I've traveled all over the world talking about this. And more often than not, as I travel in the United States, I hear this idea. Well, Shane, this document is just outdated. It's old, it's archaic, it's evil. Like, man, it was written by a bunch of old white men. Like, Shane, get with the times, man. In fact, I had a radio show for about 3 years. And my entire radio show was designed to talk about principles of freedom, take the issues of the day and analyze it through the lens of freedom and our Constitution. I get a caller, rolls in one day and goes on the air live. And he says, Shane, he says, here's the deal. He says, it's time to move on. He says, I listen to your show, but I'm just incredibly annoyed. Like, I listen to it and it's Constitution this, it's freedom that. Like, move on, man. Like, move on. And he brought up the old dead white men. He brought up the old thing 240 years ago, all that sort of nonsense. And I let him go. And I let him talk. I let him speak his piece. And then when he was done, I asked this question. So, sir, my question for you is this. Where in the Constitution is it outdated? Can you tell me where? Because I'm coming from the perspective that that's just a cute soundbite. This Constitution's outdated. So with that being said, tell me where it's outdated. Is it the 14th Amendment, that equal protection clause that says government can't choose winners and losers? There must be equal application of the law, regardless of who you are and what you stand for. Is that outdated? Or maybe it's the 13th Amendment that says no involuntary servitude, no slavery. Are you suggesting to me that that is outdated? Or maybe it's the 15th Amendment that says the government cannot stop an individual from voting based on the color of their skin. Are you suggesting that that's outdated? Or maybe it's the 19th Amendment that says the government can't stop an individual from voting based on their gender. Is that what you're suggesting is outdated? Or maybe it's this idea of the 8th Amendment that says when government imposes their resources and takes someone to trial and now wants to punish someone, that they can't use cruel and unusual measures. They have to be civil in how it is that they go about punishing the very people who have done some sort of criminal act or wrongdoing. Are you telling me that that's outdated? Or maybe it's the 5th Amendment that says, if the government accuses me of something, I don't have to help them build their case. I can remain silent and the government can't use that silence against me. Are you suggesting that that's outdated? Or maybe it's this 4th Amendment, the whole idea of the right to be left alone, that if government wants to come into my home, into my car, access personal property of mine, they've got to get a warrant. They have to go through a process in order to do that. Are you suggesting, sir, that that is outdated? Or maybe what you're talking about, and I just missed it, it was the 6th Amendment. You know, this whole idea of a right to a fair trial, the right to a speedy trial, the right to a public trial, the right to have the ability to cross-examine the government's witnesses and even compel my own witnesses to come in on my own behalf. Are you telling me that that's outdated? Or maybe what you're suggesting, sir, is that it's the 2nd Amendment that says I have a right to defend myself against whatever threat there might be, including tyranny, including tyrannical impulses that would seek to enslave the masses, and that I have a right to at least have a fighting chance. Or maybe you're suggesting it's the 1st Amendment, this whole idea of free speech and the ability to assemble and freely exercise my religion according to the dictates of my own conscience. Are you suggesting that that's outdated? Or maybe when you look at the first 7 articles of the Constitution, and it starts with the proposition that men and women with power cannot be trusted, and that those 7 articles, specifically the first 3, are designed to limit what government can do. It's not a free-for-all. They only can act within certain parameters. So guys, that's what I did. And by the way, I had a fun time doing it, because this Constitution is as far and away as being outdated as not even close. It's more relevant today than it's ever been. And so you want to know what his response was? I waited and I waited and I waited some more. And it was a dial tone. It was a dial tone. See, this document is unique. And regardless of what individuals might say, regardless of what the media might say, this thing is nowhere close to being outdated. It is relevant today. It's worth fighting for. It's worth standing up and defending. So with that said, let's make the case for the Constitution. And let's just do a brief history before we move into some real world examples and talk about this document. So leading into the Constitution, right? So this document gets started, or this whole revolution, right? You got the French Indian War in the 1750s into the 1760s. And then you have America's first Constitution called the Articles of Confederation, right? Adopted in 1777, ratified in 1781, and they move forward with this document. But what happens is you have 2 primary individuals that stand up and say, this thing is not working. James Madison, who, by the way, I think he's probably my favorite founding father. His nickname, Jemmy, J-E-M-M-Y. And Jemmy wasn't having any of this. He says, the articles aren't working. We are on the brink of disaster. We've gone through a revolution. People have given their lives. And what we've done after this revolution to try and ensure freedom is just not working. And he worked, oddly enough, in conjunction with a big government guy, right? Relatively speaking at that time, Alexander Hamilton. And so they did everything they could to bring the people together, the delegates from the various states, right? Because you've got a ruling document in place, and now it's a matter of bringing people back together. And of course, the big hoorah was, we got to get George Washington there. because as goes George Washington, so goes the country. Now, we won't talk in detail about this right now, but just know that George Washington was not interested in coming to this convention. He's not interested in whatsoever. In fact, he had told his wife, man, he had arthritis at the time, and rheumatoid arthritis that he was suffering from at the time. He's like, man, I've been involved in the French Indian War. I've been involved in the Revolutionary War. I've been involved in all of this. Man, I just want to rest. I just want to rest. Well, sure enough, he ends up there. But here's what's going on. Here's some of the divine things that I see going on here that are critical. When they arrive at this in Philadelphia for this convention in March of 1787, 12 of the 13 states send delegates, right? They only have 55 that show up. It's 2 weeks into the convention before they even have a quorum where they can actually conduct business. New Hampshire doesn't even have their delegation show up until 2 months into this thing. They simply didn't have the funds. And that leads me to the bigger issue. What was going on in the country at the time was, it was unreal, right? The states were experiencing massive depressions. The people were in debt. The national treasury was empty. You had inflation was rampant. The trade deficit was staggering. Sound familiar? Sound familiar? Kind of like what we're experiencing today in some regard. And so the odds were against these folks. It was absolutely against. I mean, being able to mobilize the delegates to come and have a conversation and then trying to get the people involved. You even had certain prominent citizens in 1787 that were saying, hold up. We want to talk about realigning with the British crown. We're not interested in this one, man. This experiment's not going so well. And so you can see the odds were against them. And now I want you to just think about this for a moment. The fact that you could bring people that were of the caliber of a George Washington, James Madison, Ben Franklin, Edmund Randolph, and the list goes on and on and on, that you have those caliber of people in this area of the country at this particular time in history is mind-boggling to me. I'm not so sure that we do that today. I'm not so sure that we bring that caliber of people here today to do something of that magnitude. It was really a special time. But once this convention begins, right, freedom is the objective. And of course, within these various delegations, you have as many opinions on what a ruling document should look like as you do numbers of people present, right? So you can imagine you've got all of these, you got farmers, you got doctors, you got lawyers, you got individuals that understand, right? They've read the classics. They understand, what lessons history have taught, and they're bringing that knowledge base to the table. And 4 months later, they come up with the greatest experiment, and they have authored the greatest political document in the history of the world. And one of the stories I love is on September 17, 1787, the day that the Constitution signing happens. You have Ben Franklin sitting up in the distance there, and he asked the question. He says, throughout this convention, I've been looking at the back of George Washington's seat, because he basically presided over the convention. And he says, I've noticed the engraving of a sun on the back of his seat. He says, I'm wondering if that is a setting sun or a rising sun. And he says, without question, it is a rising sun. And again, I believe the Constitution is more relevant today than it was even then when they authored it. And as I started out by saying, I believe the document. I believe the principles surrounding it. I believe the safeguards within it are more relevant today than they've ever been. So let's do this. What I want to do now is I want to move through four principles. And this is going to be important, because I know a lot of you tuning in, you're like, hey, I got some issues that are going on societally that I'm not having any of this. I want to have the ammunition to go in and intellectually be able to persuade and have impact. So I'm gonna go through four principles that make this Constitution unique. And that if you understand these four principles I'm about to outline, you can analyze any issue. And as you analyze the issue, you'll come out on the side of freedom. So here's number one. Number one is creed. It's a creed. Our Constitution is the only political instrument that begins with the creed that our rights are unalienable, that our rights exist by virtue of our humanity. They are inherent within us. So consider this for a moment. Where you come out on this issue will determine what kind of government you want and endorse. If you believe that liberty is inherent in the individual, you are an individual that believes in small government, that government has a very limited role. If you, on the other hand, believe that government bestows rights, well, we've got a problem on our hands, because a government that can bestow rights can also take away anything that it wants to take away. Slavery is on the horizon. Involuntary servitude's on the horizon, and freedom no longer exists. If, on the other hand, you believe that freedom comes from majority rule, well, good luck to you. As long as you are in the majority, you're going to be okay. But the moment you fall outside of majority rule within any society that you live in, I wish you the best of luck. The only philosophy, the only perspective that lends itself to really maximizing freedom in any given culture is a belief that our rights are inherent within us. And we know exactly, right? We've got a Declaration of Independence, which, by the way, we all know is not a part of the ruling document, right? It's really the preface, if you will, to, hey, here's what's to come. Here are some of the issues we're concerned about, but here's our underlying philosophy that we're willing to fight for. So when you look at the Declaration of Independence, the Declaration of Independence is the why. The Constitution is the how. The Declaration of Independence is the promise. The Constitution is the fulfillment of that promise. The Declaration of Independence is what these men and women were willing to die for. The Constitution, once ratified, is what they were willing to live for. And so this Constitution, it is undergirded by this very idea of unalienable rights. And so let's just look here for a moment. You've all seen this before. The Declaration of Independence, again, the why of our Constitution. We hold these truths to be self-evident. Notice it doesn't say we hold these opinions to be up for a vote. Let's put it on the ballot box. They said we hold these truths to be self-evident. In other words, any idiot can understand this, right? That's what they meant here. Like, these aren't things that we argue about. Like, man, every person has the inherent liberty to say what they think and to think what they want and to exercise, whatever it is that they want to do, so long as they're not infringing on the liberties of other people. In other words, my right to swing my fist ends where your chin begins. I have inherent liberties, and government didn't give them to me. My next door neighbor didn't give them to me. They exist simply by virtue of my humanity. And it says this here, we hold these truths to be self-evident. All men are created equal. Again, remember, this is the promise. I always hear people say, well, there they go again, saying these old white men saying they were created equal. Well, let's take a look there. Guys, that was the promise. They were putting an instrument into place to allow the fulfillment of this ideal. The Declaration of Independence is an ideal that we're striving after. Who in their right mind would argue against this ideal? Nobody, unless you got a political bone to pick with someone. Nobody in their right mind that's using any semblance of logic would argue that men and women as an ideal are born equal, and that they're endowed by their creator, not endowed by their government. They're endowed by their creator. And if you're not a God-fearing person, they're inherent within you. You are born with these liberties within you, and among those are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Let me go back and just explain something here real quick to you. Some men say the world is flat, while others say that the world is round. If the world is round, could the decree of a king make it flat? And if it is flat, could the decree of Parliament make it round? That was the closing argument of Sir Thomas More. in his trial where he represented himself against the government, where he refused to acknowledge the king. He refused to acknowledge the king. And of course, he ultimately lost that argument. He lost the trial, and they separated his head from his body, right? They beheaded him. But what was Sir Thomas More arguing here? He was appealing to natural rights. He was appealing to the inherent liberty that you can't force me to believe or give allegiance to anyone or anything. This is what he was talking about. And here it is solidified right in our Declaration of Independence, this idea of inherent liberty. Now, what's the flip side? Well, the flip side is this. Woodrow Wilson was an individual who did not believe that men and women are born free and that men and women with power cannot be trusted. He was, in fact, the opposite. He said he believed that men and women are not born free, and men and women with power can be trusted. They were somehow benevolent. Right? I don't know how anybody who ever studied history could ever come to that conclusion, other than someone who loves power and who, oh wait, yeah, he was the president, right? So here's the thing. Woodrow Wilson, at one point, this was around 1910, said, you may say men and women are born free, but deep down in your hearts, you know they are not. Those were his words, not mine. FDR, Roosevelt, said, necessitous men are not born free. Woodrow Wilson, going back to him, said, if you want to, this is critical, right? Because we're talking about two philosophies clashing here. One that believes in freedom and that they're inherent within us, and one that believes government is the end all be all and they give us our liberty. And here he says, if you believe men and women are born free, you and I deep down in our heart know they are not. That's what he said. And then he says, if you want to understand the Declaration of Independence, don't read the preface. If you want to understand the Declaration of Independence, don't read the preface. Guys, what's the preface? We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they're endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. That's the preface of the document. You eliminate the preface, what's left? The 27 grievances outlined. And here's what he says. Like, I don't care. Well, we're not beholden to the founders. They can do, like, those old men 130 years ago, this is him talking in 1910, they can solve their problems any way that they want to solve them. We are in a new era. We will decide how we're going to solve our problems. And we see this underlying philosophy through many, many different administrations and really many different just groups out there that believe, man, we love government. I won't name any of them. You know who I'm talking about. Man, we love government. We want government intervening into our lives. They know how to run our lives better than we do, right? So isn't that interesting? You have Sir Thomas More on the one hand, and then you have a Declaration of Independence talking about inherent liberties, but you have a philosophy out there that is ever so present right now, which says liberty only exists by virtue of government. Nothing could be further from the truth. Think about it this way, metaphorically. If I get up and I'm going to go down to the grocery store, when I leave my home, I would turn left, and then I would turn right. And I would tell you the reason why I go that direction is because I'm free to do that. That's the way I want to go. Well, metaphorically speaking, the side that believes in men and women are not born free and men and women with power can be trusted, they would say, wait a second, Shane. Well, the reason why you go that direction in your life is not because you're free, but because you're enslaved. You are forced to make certain decisions, and it's only us that can liberate you. You don't have enough food on the table. We'll give you food stamps. You don't, man, housing's an issue. Let us provide housing, right? Water. Well, let's make sure that you've got all that you need. You have an inherent right to, hey, a job, you don't have a job? Well, man, we'll go ahead and give you a job. Those are not inherent liberties. You have the right to pursue those things, but you do not have a right to have someone provide those things for you. That's the key here. That's the key. So the whole idea of a creed, I'm going to go back here and share my screen with you. I want to show you one other thing here. That's, let's see where that went here. There we go. So again, why is government instituted? To secure the rights. Now, I want to just share with you a personal religious perspective. So I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And my religious viewpoint is that this Constitution is divinely inspired. In fact, it's a doctrinal component of my religious belief. It's not just an outsider looking in saying, yeah, it looks like, yeah, there might have been some divine intervention. From a religious perspective, I believe that it is. And this actually comes from one of our canon of scriptures. Check this out. This is awesome. It doesn't matter what religious background you come from. It's a different way of looking at the declaration. It says that every man may act according to the moral agency which I have given unto him, that every man may be accountable for his own sins in the day of judgment. Therefore, it is not right that any man should be in bondage to one another. And for this purpose have I established the constitution of this land. The I is referring to God. We believe this was inspiration. And so I love this, because here's what it's suggesting. This is about as pure of a liberty statement that you'll ever find. And it's saying that, wait a second, individuals have inherent liberty. God has endowed every individual with those inherent liberties, and we should be free to act. And when we stand before the judgment bar, we should not be able to utilize the excuse that the reason why I did A, B, and C is because the government forced me to do it. But that's the idea. And that's why our Constitution is so unique, is because it was designed to allow individuals to do whatever they wanted to do, so long as they didn't infringe on the life, liberty, or property of other individuals. So where I come from is, man, I have a moral code. There's some things that I disagree with out there, many issues I disagree with, and I'll engage in the marketplace of ideas, but I will not use government action to stop individuals from doing certain things. Let me just give you an example. Drugs. Morally, I'm opposed. I'm opposed to it. But who is government to tell you and me what we're going to put in our bodies? And what does that look like? What is the logical outworking of government say what you and I can put into our body? Where do we go from there? Hey, the fumes at a gas station are deadly. We're concerned that children over long periods of time experiencing that are going to experience side effects. So no children allowed when you fill up for gas. Where do we go from there? Right? And we could come up with some really absurd examples. But government, should they be able to tell us? See, I love this idea of saying, so long as you're doing what you want to do, I might be a voice opposed to what you're doing, and I would have no problem articulating my opposition. But where the line stops for me is saying, well, man, you're not going to stop doing that? Well, I'm going to go over here and talk to my mayor. I'm going to talk to my governor. Well, let me talk to my congressman, and I'm going to have them use the force of government to stop you. That is in contradistinction from what you're seeing on your screen right now, right? That he may be accountable for his own sins in the day of judgment. Therefore, it's not right that any man should be in bondage to one another. And for this purpose, I have established this Constitution. I think it's a special document. I think it's divinely inspired. And it all starts with that underpinning of a creed. That's what it starts with. So guys, let's go to the second principle. The second principle is you got to have a written document enforceable by the people. It's got to be enforceable by the people. And so what do I mean by that? Well, there's two keys to a written document where it is enforceable. Note I'm not saying these are just cool ideas that the people in general agree with. You got to have a written instrument. You have to have the ideas and the principles and the law written down on a piece of paper. It just goes without being said. I wouldn't write a contract and say, hey, you know what? We don't need a contract. And I'm negotiating for millions of dollars. I'd want a contract in place to be able to hold both parties accountable. It's the same thing here, right? If I were to engage in a contract with you and you don't uphold your end of the bargain, or let's switch it around. We engage in a contract, I don't uphold my end of the bargain. Well, what's going to happen? There's going to be a civil judgment imposed, or maybe I go to jail. Well, isn't that interesting? Today, in our day and age, we elect individuals who are under oath. They've essentially signed a contract by virtue of that oath. And what happens when they violate the oath? They make more money and they stay in office and have a beautiful retirement waiting for them. Are you kidding me? This is what's going on. So the standard with you and me engaging in contracts, one thing, but the standard for individuals that we're electing into office who have taken an oath to uphold the most precious thing that you and I have access to, our liberty, and we're playing We're playing loosey-goosey with this thing. We're making short work of this thing. Now is the time for people to stand up. Now is the time to be proud of the idea of freedom and stop worrying about what the talking heads might say or what they might say to you on social media or anywhere else. To take pride in the idea of the results that this Constitution has provided. I mean, I believe America is exceptional. I believe when I talk about America, though, I'm referring to the idea. The idea of America has produced results. If we could take those ideas and bring them down into Peru, I would say there's Peruvian exceptionalism. But we're one of the few countries that's experimented to this degree and seen result after result after result come our way, where we've just prospered in every arena. So with that said, let's talk about, let's go back here. Separation of powers. Separation of powers is critical. So what do I mean by separation of powers? Well, when you look at our Constitution, it has 7 articles and 27 amendments. 7 articles, 27 amendments. Now, within those first 7 articles, you have the first 3 articles are designed to tell the 3 branches of government what they're permitted to do. So Article 1 is legislative branch. Article 2 is executive branch. Article 3 is judicial branch. Here's what I want you to memorize. LEJ. LEJ. Article 1 legislative, Article 2 executive, Article 3 judicial. Anytime government decides that they're going to act, the question should become, where in the Constitution do they have the authority to do that? When Congress comes out with a new bill, something that, it's a piece of legislation, your question should always be, first and foremost, not is it a good idea or a bad idea? That's not the issue. The issue, first and foremost, is where in Article 1 does the legislative branch have the power to do what they're doing? When the president is doing something, right? Engaging in some sort of executive order or some sort of administrative duty, whatever they might be, war, whatever the case may be. The question should be, where in Article 2 does the president have the authority to do what he's doing? And then Article 3, judicial branch. Where do they have the authority to do what they're doing? See, but here's what happens. Here's what happens. We elect individuals into office and we say, that's my guy. That's my guy. And we turn a blind eye to the parameters of authority that he has or she has within the ruling document. And so we love that our guy's in office, but what happens 8 years from now when your guy isn't in office? The Constitution over those 4 or 8 years while your guy was in office was adulterated. It was weakened even more. And now you want to come back with a document that has teeth? It's not how it works. It's being consistent through the process. Consistent through, regardless of who is in office. I'll give you an example. There was an individual, this was back in 2008, 2009, who said he was moving forward with a piece of legislation. And he was asked this question on national TV. Where in the Constitution do you have the authority to do what you're doing? And here was his response. He said, where in the Constitution does it say that I can't? Where in the Constitution does it say that I can't? How would you respond to that? How do you think the average American would respond to that? How do you think our young people would respond to that? I don't know that most people would know how to respond to that other than just saying, well, I don't like your idea. Now it becomes an argument of good idea versus bad idea. Guys, if we're going to engage in a good idea, bad idea argument, say goodbye to freedom. Because good idea, bad idea, the person who wins that argument is whoever's a part of the majority. That's a terrible way to govern. It's why Thomas Jefferson said that democracies are the most vile form of government out there. Because once the majority rules and they embrace the wrong ideas, everybody gets hurt at some point. So it's maintaining strong within the standards, regardless of whoever you have in office. And many of you folks may be strong advocates of the individual in the current administration. Many of you may have been strong advocates of the president that was in office for the previous 8 years. The question, if you're a true liberty advocate and you're willing to defend this document, is being consistent regardless of who's there. Regardless if it was a guy that you voted for, saying, you know what, hold up here. You know what, I voted for this guy, But what he's doing is not permitted by the Constitution. What he's doing is not permitted by the rule of law. And so, that's one perspective. Now, in that same conversation that I was telling you about, where he's asked on national TV, where in the Constitution do you have the authority to do ABC? And he says, where does it say that I can't? Well, what's the response to that? The response is this: the Constitution is a document that limits powers. This is key. It's not one of positive powers, meaning, hey, the Constitution is going to outline everything you're permitted to do once you get into office. There's very little of that in the Constitution. It is primarily a document of negative powers. In other words, unless it says, Congress, you can do this, guess what it means? You can't do it. Hey, President, unless it says you can do it in Article 2, guess what that means? You can't do it. Judicial branch, unless it outlines it specifically that you're permitted to do these things, you can't do it. It's primarily a document of negative powers. And so this individual on national TV, he's saying, where in the Constitution does it say that I can't? Well, Article 1, Section 1 would be a good start. How about the first paragraph of the Constitution? Right? All legislative powers herein granted are vested in Congress. Right? So the powers that you have are enumerated. Article 1, Section 8 goes in and talks about some of those things. But Article 1, Section 1, guys, this is not a complicated document, darn it. Article 1 says all legislative powers herein granted are vested in Congress. And if you forgot to read Article 1, Section 1, well, you can read the matching bookend called the 10th Amendment. It says, if it's not included in there, federal government, you don't have the power. It rests with the states. It rests with the states, right? So this is an example of someone who's elected into office who had no clue. Well, he went on later during the course of that conversation and said, you know what? Actually, most of what we're doing in Washington, D.C. is not permitted by the Constitution. Isn't that crazy? And yet what happens? This guy continues to be reelected. Crazy. And can we come to grips with what individuals are doing who are running for office? Thomas Sowell, a great philosopher, a commentator, he says, individuals in office are concerned about two things: elections and re-elections. It's all they're concerned about. So when you look at an individual who goes on national TV and says, most of what we do in Washington, D.C. isn't permitted by the Constitution, what kind of problem do you have on your hand? You have a constituency problem that says, you know what, go and do what you got to do, right? Go empty the coffers, give us free stuff, go do it, right? And that's what we see going on. And he can stand up on national TV, say, man, this Constitution, whatever, it is what it is, I'll do what I want to do, and still gets reelected. Crazy. Then you have other individuals in Congress that say things like, we're the ones who bestow. So I'll just give you an example. When the whole Healthcare Act came out, there was one particular senator that said, we finally are able to bestow the inherent right of healthcare onto the American people. Sorry to break it to you, but healthcare is not a fundamental liberty. Why? Well, because a fundamental liberty is inherent within you. You can go out and pursue healthcare. You can go out and hire a doctor. You can go out and seek medical attention. But no way, you can't force someone to offer medical care to you. What about the people? What, we're going to ask all these doctors who have gone through all this schooling and, hey, come to my office. You now have a constitutional right, an inherent right to make me perform a service on you? Are you kidding me? Like, where do these people come from? Nowhere close, not even close. But he said that on national TV, and the American people applauded him. The bill went through. It went through. Absolutely incredible. So, guys, let's back up for a moment. I've got to have a creed in place. We've got the creed, a recognition of unalienable liberties. Number two, I've got to have a written document, right? That's designed to solidify and protect liberty. And within that written document, I have to have the separation of power and division of authority, right? I've got to have that. Let me show you the next thing that we've got to have. The next thing that we've got to have here is this. We've got to have, I'm going back to my share screen, we've got to have the enumeration of rights. Now, this is always an interesting conversation because you know what? I know on this call, there's a lot of small government people. And I know there's other folks on this call, you're a little bit more moderate. You're like, I'm willing to give a little bit more leeway. Well, this was an interesting discussion at the time of the authoring of the Bill of Rights. So remember, The Constitution is adopted in 1788. It's ratified in, it's adopted in 1787. It's ratified in 1788. And the Bill of Rights doesn't come around until 1791. Now, you all know what the Bill of Rights is, right? It's the first 10 amendments, the first 10 amendments. Well, why were those original Bill of Rights not initially a part of the Constitution? Well, I think there was this underlying belief that the people understand liberty. The Constitution limits very specifically what government's permitted to do, and liberty will thrive. Well, what they found out is it wasn't quite the case. And so the anti-federalist, small government folks, and the federalist, a little bit bigger government folks, come together and they have this argument. And the federalists say, you know what? We need to start enumerating liberties and really have it be more than just talking about it. Like, let's put it into a document that's akin to our Constitution. And so the anti-federalists are not on board with this. They do not want a Bill of Rights for a very interesting reason that I bet many of you would agree with. They say, if we enumerate our rights, where do we stop? There's literally millions of rights that you and I have that we could enumerate. So if we only enumerate a couple, what's going to happen is in the future, people are going to say, well, if it's not in the Bill of Rights, I guess we don't have it. Interestingly enough, we've seen some of that, right? Well, where does it say the right to marry in the Constitution? Well, it doesn't. Where does it say it in the Bill of Rights? Well, it doesn't, right? You kind of get the point. The anti-federalists even came up with this one example. They said, I have an inherent right to go to bed and lay on my right side. I also have the inherent liberty to go to bed and lay on my left side. So, hey, Federalists, are you going to outline in the Bill of Rights? Are you going to put that I have those inherent liberties to make sure that government now and in the future will never infringe upon them? You see where we're going with this? The anti-federalists absolutely despise the idea. Do not enumerate liberties. Well, they ultimately come to some sort of consensus, and they outline things like free speech, free assembly, free exercise of religion, the Second Amendment and the right to bear arms, and you got the right of privacy, the right to be left alone, by the way, my favorite, in the Fourth Amendment, and other rights that are there. But the Ninth Amendment is designed to make it very clear that just because certain rights aren't enumerated in the Bill of Rights doesn't mean it doesn't exist, right? This is critical because right now, you look at the freedom fighters out there, many of them are getting run over the top of. Because people are saying, well, you in your Constitution, where does it say you have that inherent liberty? Show me in your Constitution. And most aren't aware on how to respond, right? It's the Ninth Amendment that makes it very clear. And so, again, it goes back to this underlying philosophy. I believe that the enumeration of rights, as they did it in this Constitution, was divine. I really do. I believe it was inspired because I look at many of those fundamental liberties that you and I rely on. The right of free speech, the right to assemble, the right to defend ourselves. Again, that right to be left alone. If those things aren't enumerated, I believe those things that would have disappeared 100 years ago. They would have been long gone. But at least we have a fighting chance. At least we have a fighting chance with it being enumerated, right? Now it's a matter of the people going out and engaging. But again, we have to decide. You have to decide, where do you stand? Either rights are inherent within us or rights are a gift from government. And that will determine your entire philosophy. So let me give you one more example before I move on to the next one. As you look at the Bill of Rights, it says Congress shall make no law infringing, I'm going to paraphrase because I want to hit on the freedom of speech. Congress shall make no law infringing on the freedom of speech. What's the most important word in the First Amendment? When I throw out that phrase, Congress shall make no law infringing or abridging the freedom of speech. What's the most important word? Would you say it's Congress? Would you say it's not? Would you say it's abridge? The most important word is the word the. It's the word the. Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech. Because what they were doing was the founders, the authors of this document, were recognizing something that pre-existed them. They were recognizing something that pre-existed the government that they were creating, pre-existed the very document. So they're just noting the freedom of speech. They didn't create it. They're saying the freedom of speech, the free exercise of religion. It's always existed. It's always been inherent, and they're enumerating it in this Bill of Rights of ours. So, guys, there you have it. So I'm going to go back to sharing my screen with you here, and we're going to hit on a couple more principles. So I've got number one, I've got the creed. Number two, I've got the whole idea of division of power and separation of authority. And then number three is popular sovereignty. To have a political system where freedom thrives, popular sovereignty is critical. It's absolutely critical. Now, who is the ultimate guardians of the Constitution? I've said it many times. Well, those of you that are on video that can see me, I'm going to do a little experiment on screen with you to make this point. To make this point, because we can't just hope that we yell and scream from the rooftops and that the document will enforce itself. Remember at the very beginning of this presentation, I said the Constitution is a complex maze of booby traps designed to stop tyranny in its tracks. So right here, what I'm holding up on your screen, this is a coyote trap, right? Coyote trap of sorts. And I think it's a great analogy for what the Constitution is designed to do and what our role is, right? What does popular sovereignty mean, by the way? It means people engaged, right? Popular sovereignty is we're the sovereigns, we're the bosses, right? Those that we elect into government, they're not the bosses, they're the servants. We're the masters. And so what's happening is, so I want you to imagine here you've got this trap, and I'm just going to take this pin, pop the pin. I probably got ink on me in the process. Guys, this is how the Constitution is designed to work. When government at any level decides to do something that infringes on your liberty and my liberty, this is what it's supposed to do. It's supposed to engage. The trap's supposed to engage. And the ability to hold those people accountable and to have the various branches of government holding each other accountable. That's the idea. So you might be wondering, why is it over the last 100 years that government has grown bigger and liberty has receded? There's nobody that can make the argument that over the last 100 years, that whether it was Republican or Democrat in office, government has grown bigger and bigger and bigger, and liberty has receded with every administration, every single one. Why? The trap's not engaged. The trap's not engaged. If the Constitution is a complex maze of booby traps designed to stop tyranny, then why is tyranny thriving right now? At all levels of government, federal all the way down to your local state with all the craziness going on right now. Why is tyranny thriving right now? Because we have a people that are not engaged. We have a people that don't understand the freedom. I'm talking in broad terms. I'm painting with a broad brush. And we have a people that don't know how to engage the document. Before we leave here tonight, I'm going to tell you how to engage. I'm going to give you some suggestions, right? So it's not just give you the education and, hey, thanks for joining me, right? That's the idea behind popular sovereignty, that we're the bosses, right? We decide. And so it's a matter of taking that government back, and we can decide, are we good with domination of the state, or are we ultimately good with personal liberty? So let me share with you one technique that can be used. This is a technique that I have used in 15 years of teaching college. Again, I taught at 2 different public colleges. You might be a little bit surprised. You're listening to me. You're like, how did you get a position at a public college? I taught there for 15 years, and that was quite a blessing. Because here's what I enjoyed, and I'm going to bring you to these. I'm going to show you 3 questions on how I engaged at various, not just in the college and university, but how I've engaged for the last 2 decades in terms of trying to help people see liberty is worth defending, and liberty can't be undermined. I'll show you that in a second, but let me tell you a little bit about my philosophy here in the classroom. I was teaching at a public college. I couldn't just go in and say, oh, let's look at these issues. They're wrong here. They were right here. Wrong. I couldn't do that. That's not the idea behind education. The idea was to engage my students. And so my classroom was very Socratic. They would come into my classroom, and most of them came into my classroom right out of high school, and they had big government ideas. And so they would come in, and it was rather interesting because in the Socratic method I would use, we would talk free speech. Guys, we had a field day talking about free speech, flag burning, KKK, We're talking about all these real issues that have gone up to the U.S. Supreme Court and discussing, what do you think about that issue? Does someone are they at liberty to do? Are they at liberty to burn the American flag and call it speech? Are they at liberty to start a riot and say, man, I was just speaking words, right? We talked about those issues. And then we talked about free exercise of religion. And we talked about Second Amendment. We spent about 6 hours in the classroom debating Second Amendment issues, the right to privacy, abortion. We discussed all those things. And what I would do in the classroom is this, guys, this is super critical. I'm not just doing this to say, hey, I want you to just see, I'm illustrating something that's critical for you to understand if you're going to be a liberty advocate. In the midst of these conversations where I would bring up a scenario and we would discuss, my students never knew where I stood. So I'd have one student say, no, I think that's a free speech issue. They're certainly at liberty to do it. And I would play devil's advocate and grind and hit them from every which angle by virtue of the question. And then somebody would jump on board with me and say, yeah, you know what, Professor Krauser is right. And I would switch moves and go over and go after this guy. What I was doing was trying to get them to think through these things conceptually. I wanted them to really understand, what is the right answer? And you know what the most common response after teaching 15 years in college, my most common report to me, if you will, after 16 weeks of being with them was, why have I never heard these things before? Professor Krauser, why have I never heard these things before? I never learned any of these things in high school. I never, like when I listen to the media, I never learned any of this stuff. What's going on? And here's my point. Most of my students came into my classroom oriented towards big government and left freedom fighters. Not because I did anything to push them there. I simply opened up a conversation that they'd never had before. That's my point. When people hear the principles of liberty being argued in the midst of the overarching ideas that are out there, most people will come down on the side of liberty. It's just human nature. That's what we'll do. But we're not pushing that message out there. So what are the 3 questions? Write these down. For those of you that got notes, you're going to want to write these down, because I use these in the classroom. I'd use this in political debates that I was involved with. I went out to Columbia University years ago and was in an auditorium with a lot of students that didn't like where I was coming from necessarily. And I started with these 3 questions. These are powerful. So I want you to imagine you're in an auditorium with a group of students, and they're there to eat your lunch. And so I asked the first question, who here wants to be left alone? Who here wants to be left alone? I've been in some of the most adversarial environments, and I've never had one person not raise their hand. Everybody wants to be left alone. Everybody wants to be like, let me live my life. There's very few people out there that would say, you know what, I don't really want to be left alone because I am certain government can live my life better than I can, right? Very few people will do that. So that was question number 1. And question number 2 was this: who here believes government should follow the rules? Every hand goes up. See, now it becomes a question of what are the rules, right? That's a fun debate to have. But can we at least have some common ground that government should follow the rules? Everybody agrees on that. And then the third question, where sometimes I'll get some disagreement, is this: who here believes that they should be able to keep what they earn? Now, I've been in college settings where I've asked the first 2 questions, everybody raises their hand, and I go to ask the third question, and I got some people raising their hands saying, no, I don't believe that. I don't believe you should be able to keep what you earn. Well, what do you mean I shouldn't be able to keep what I earn? Well, you know, there should be a threshold. $250,000, that's about enough. Anything over $250,000, you need to be given back. Like, we need to have some income redistribution. Oh, really? So let's do this. If you're good with that, I know a lot of you guys got cell phones, you got iPads, you got wallets with money in them. Why don't you go ahead and just bring those things up to the podium? I'm going to gather those things, and when we're done with class today, we'll go down to a thrift store. We'll exchange them. We'll take the money. We'll redistribute this. We'll give it out to people who need it. How about that? You know, I've never had one student take me up on that offer in almost 20 years. Never had anybody take me on that offer. Why? Because socialism or communism, right, taking from some who have produced to give it to others, those are cool ideas until it impacts you, until it impacts your pocketbook, until it impacts your personal property that you worked hard for. So that's that third question. But this has been amazing because in my classroom where I had big government students coming in, they didn't call themselves big government. They thought they were the voice of reason. Well, they found out soon they weren't, right? They'd come in and I would start on the first day of class by asking those three questions. And when we got to an issue like flag burning, hey, wait a second. 3 weeks ago, when we started class, I asked you if you believe government should follow the rules. And if you believe that speech, one of the rules that government must follow was they can't make a law abridging the freedom of speech. Tell me where you're coming from here. Boom, it's an immediate shift, right? Okay, I get that. I didn't know that was in the rule book. That's the idea here. Those are some of the things that we can start to engage with. Do you want to be left alone? Do you believe government should follow the rules? Do you believe you should be able to keep what you earn? And ultimately, with the principles of popular sovereignty, this is one of those methods that we can use to ultimately go out and engage. Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to show you one more principle, and then we're going to close this out by just giving you some suggestions on what you can ultimately do to really have impact. So here we go. I'm going back to my my share screen. Guys, there are only two forms of government out there. There's only two forms. I know we talk about a monarchy, an oligarchy, democracy, anarchy, Republican form of government. In reality, there's only two different kinds of governments that have ever existed. Anarchy has never existed for a sustainable period of time. It always evolves into an oligarchy. Oh, I love the idea of no government. And then when people start getting hosed, right, and it's not going well for them, I'm no longer within the majority, within the anarchy scheme, right? Someone's got to rise up. And I look to the very individuals that started the revolution to get them to quell the problem. And now we evolve into an oligarchy. It's the same thing with the democracy. A democracy has never existed long-term in any country in the history of the world. Democracies always evolve into oligarchy because it becomes 51% versus the 49%, and someone's getting upset. Leadership has to rise up. It's not the 51% of the people anymore. It's a small group of people that the majority say, please help us. And it revolves into an oligarchy, right? A monarchy, the same thing. In the history of the world, you've never had a true full-blown monarchy. It's always, you might have a front man, but behind the front man, you've got individuals that are really, doing the puppeteering, if you will. So you really have two different forms of government that have existed long-term. You've had oligarchies, which exist all over the world right now. In fact, many people would claim our country has evolved into an oligarchy. I don't know that I would go that far, but nevertheless, oligarchies exist all over the world. The other form of government is a Republican form of government. And that's what this Constitution was designed to do. Article 4, Section 4 of our Constitution guarantees every state a Republican form of government. Let me give you an illustration, because I think sometimes when we talk about Republican form of government, the vision that we have is, well, I vote for individuals and those people represent me in government. That's a part of the Republican form of government, but that's not the essence of it. The essence of a Republican form of government is that in the midst of individuals exercising their liberty, even the smallest guy will be defended. Example, I live in a community of 1,000 people. 999 of them are Catholic. One of them is a Buddhist. The 999 come together and say, you know what, we're going to vote on this. The only religion that can be practiced in our town is Catholicism. And they pass it through. Done. What happens to the little guy? In a democracy, the little guy, too bad, so sad. In a Republican form of government, that law is illegitimate. That law is not permissible, because we defend even the little guy, even in the midst of what the majority might say, right? This is an important key. See, here's what goes on. I watch social media, and most people out there that are not engaged like me and you, they think it's a battle of who's in the majority. Like the right opinion revolves around the most people that are behind the idea. I found that that's generally not the case. What I have found that wherever the majority stand, it's probably the wrong idea. I think history lends support to that. Wherever majorities stand, generally the wrong ideas are embraced, right? That's why liberty has always been defended by such a small percentage. But you have a small percentage of people that know how to engage and they have influence. We can make big things happen. That's why I've never been more hopeful for the United States. I've never been more hopeful for freedom. I believe our best days are on the horizon, not because we have a majority that are on board with me and you. We don't need a majority. You need a small, engaged percentage of people that know how to go out there and inspire and motivate. And some of you will, run for office. Others of you will take on other assignments and duties that we'll talk about here in just a moment. But we come together as a collaborative force, understanding the principles of liberty, and you need 3 to 5% of the population, if that, to move this thing back to where it needs to go. So what is a Republican form of government? I want to give you a real example to drive this point home, because this is critical. This is what I believe makes this document, again, another example of a divinely inspired document, is this form of government. So I want you to imagine you're living out on the in the countryside. You got a ranch, and let's say I've got my ranch out there with you, and off in the distance I see my horse being ridden by someone else, and they didn't have permission. And so I call all the townspeople and I say, "Get him! The guy's got my horse." And we all take off after him. We bring him back, and I say, "Hey, listen, guys, you know what we do in this town. We don't put up with horse thieves. What do we do with horse thieves? We hang them. We don't just hang them. We hang them high and we watch them die. Like, this is what we do in this town." And of course, what happens? This is what happens, right? Majority rule. That's an example of a democracy, if you will, right? The majority say, yay, the guy's a bad guy. Boom, done. He's done for. But guys, that's not the kind of government we live in. I don't care how bad, you're watching something go on in the media where someone committed a terrible crime. I don't care how terrible it is. If we don't protect due process, your liberties are next. We want government to abide by those rules, despite the fact that we might think it's a slam dunk case, just like in the case of the horse thief. No. Same scenario. Individual takes off on my horse. I bring them back and I say, "Hey, all those in favor of hanging this guy, raise your hand." And everybody raises their hand. But what happens this time? What happens is the sheriff arrives in town. The executive branch arrives in town and says, "Guys, I might agree with you, but you're not hanging this guy. This guy has rights. He has a right to a fair trial. He has a right to a speedy trial. He has a right to a public trial. He has a right to confront the witnesses being brought against him. And he even has a right to bring in his own alibi witnesses. He has a right to remain silent. That silence can't be used against him. He has a right to a fair and impartial jury. And that means all you buckaroos, you're not sitting on this jury." Guys, that's a Republican form of government. And my hope is, as we go out and defend the principles of liberty, that it's not just about what we like, our version of liberty. It's about defending liberty across the board. This is how we move this experiment in the right direction. So I want to close with just a few things here. Number one, this is one of the ecclesiastical leaders that I follow. He's now passed away. His name is John Taylor. And he wrote this, or said this. This was about 150 years ago. His name's John Taylor. And he said, "Our work is to maintain the perpetuation of free agency and the maintaining of liberty, freedom, and the rights of man." I believe the Constitution does this better than any other political instrument out there. And I believe that God was instrumental in putting this thing together by using men that had prepared themselves, men and women that had prepared themselves to solidify these ideas through the document. I love this idea of free agency. Let people live their lives the way they want to live them. And so long as they're not infringing on life, liberty, property, let them live. Let them be accountable for what they want to do. I'm watching, just as an example, I'm watching businesses right now do things that many of you don't agree with. And quite frankly, I don't agree with. But guess what? As a business owner, I can run my business any way I want to run it. Let the marketplace of ideas, let the marketplace in general take care of those sorts of things. I'm not going to go and look for government to tell a business how to run its affairs. Are you kidding me? I'm a liberty guy. I'm a freedom guy. I'm not using government to solve that sort of problem. We're going to engage in the free marketplace to solve that problem. I'm not shopping there. And I'll go out and tell other people not to shop there. That's no problem. But using government to tell private entities what they should do? No, we have some people that don't understand what it means to be free. I'm sorry. That's just the way it is. Let's stand for liberty for all. Let's embrace Republican form of government for all. Let's make that happen. So with that said, ladies and gentlemen, let me just outline a few things here, because I got a lot of messages from you over the last, 10, 14 days saying, Shane, are you going to tell us about what to do and how we can engage? Guys, here's the deal. I want to be very, very transparent with you, upfront, honest with you. I am not a political action guy. It's not what I do. But I know that there's many people watching on YouTube. There's many people watching this via Facebook, and there's many people on Zoom watching this that are politically active. In fact, I know there are people watching this who are running for office right now. I know there are people who are watching this right now that are a part of their campaigns. I love it. When people ask me, what should I do? My response is always, what do you feel called to do? If you were to tell me, hey, Shane, you need to come over and help us make phone calls for this particular candidate, I would tell you that's not what I'm called to do. I'm a full-time freedom advocate. I'm a retired lawyer. I retired at the age of 43. I am full-time on the front lines as an advocate of liberty. I'm doing every single day what I've been called to do. But what I've been called to do is not to make phone calls. Now, I'm not suggesting that's not important. I know other people out there feel as though they're called to do those things. So my point is this. When you ask me, what should I do? I don't believe in blanket statements of, well, everybody needs to call their congressman. Yeah, we need to be involved, right? And there's going to be some people out there, as they're involved, that are going to mobilize that effort. There's going to be other, hey, you need to come help us put up signs, man. Elections are right around the corner. There's going to be people that are called to mobilize that effort. But that's not Shane. That's not what I'm doing. I'm a change the culture guy. I'm the education guy. I'm the educate the people and tyranny will vanish like evil spirits at the break of dawn guy. That's what I do. That's what God's called me to do. And so when you talk about finding what you are supposed to be doing, this is going to be some introspection, some serious introspection, because I believe that advocating the principles of liberty is divine. And if I'm right, and if that's true, that advocating these principles is divine, it also means that you are called to do something specific within the movement. And the biggest struggle is going to be finding out what that is. But once you find it out, look out. All bets are off. Katie barred the door, right? It's a big deal. But where does this all start? I believe it starts with righteousness, right? Bringing in that God component back in, which I will never abandon here because of my simple belief system on what happened with this country, even as with all the problems it's having. Righteousness exalteth a nation. It's in Proverbs. Righteousness exalteth a nation. I believe that as we come together as good, decent people, we're all sinners, but as good, decent people, that God will bless this land. And he'll bless lands all over the world as there's good, upstanding people that understand the principles of liberty, that are enlightened in that regard, that those lands will be blessed. But it starts with righteousness. Second, learn the principles of the Constitution. What books should you read? Well, I've written 2 books. Of course, I'm a little biased. I think my books rock. In fact, if you go to a couple of these on YouTube, and I've listed the link where you can buy my books. I've written a book called Your Nation to Save. It's an outline of the Constitution. And then I've written another book called What is Freedom? Is it for you? It's 25 ideas that'll change the way you see America. And these are ideas that I implemented with my family, ideas that I utilized as I went out and engaged the masses, colleges, political groups, freedom groups, you name it. It is awesome. You'll see a lot of fun ideas, but you can actually go to the Eventbrite page, which is where this whole event started from. You can buy books on there. But even beyond that, you've got to learn the principles of the Constitution. You got to read the document. But can I tell you what I believe is even more important, at least initially? People ask me, well, Shane, what book did I read? Well, the first book, if you want to be a freedom advocate, are you ready for this? How to Win Friends and Influence People. I'm not kidding. I'm not saying this in jest. The #1 book that freedom advocates should be reading first and foremost is How to Win Friends and Influence People. Let me just make the case for this. I watch people all the time on social media that understand liberty, but they're jerks. They're jerks. And all they're doing is winning an argument, but they haven't gathered allies whatsoever. A good freedom advocate stands firm in his position, but is great at creating allies. Great at creating allies. I remember back in my days as a trial lawyer, I tried a number of cases in front of juries. And when I was in front of a jury, my objective was not to win the argument. My objective was to create allies in that jury box, because I knew that not all the time I wasn't going to get everyone agreeing with me walking out to go deliberate, but I got to have some allies in my corner. Who are my allies? I might, if I have a jury of 12, I might have 11 of them are my allies. I might have just one of them are my allies, like, oh, I'm in trouble here. But I want to equip individuals to be allies, to run arm in arm with me. And I just know this idea of how to win friends and influence people, this is where it all starts. I don't care how well you know the principles of liberty. I don't care if you understand the Constitution inside out. You can name all the founding fathers. There are 56 founders that signed off on this Declaration of Independence. There are 39 that signed off on the Constitution. Like, you can outline all the facts. That stuff doesn't matter unless you know how to relate to people. This is key. And so if we're going to create a movement here, wherever you're called to be, that has real teeth and real feet, we have to have the individuals out on the front lines. We got to allow our influence to be felt. That's ultimately what it comes down to. So, with that said, I know there's a little frustrating element here, because you're looking for, man, I want more information. Like, what do I need to do? Here's what I will tell you. Having retired, 5 years ago and walked away because, I was working as an attorney and I felt God calling me. That's being absolutely frank with you. God was calling me to do something different with my life. And all the outsiders couldn't understand it. Friends and family couldn't understand it. But they weren't having the conversation. I was. I knew what I was called to do. And here's what I believe. I believe in the midst of this fight, entrepreneurship is critical. Entrepreneurship. If you're going to move the message of freedom, an entrepreneurship revolution must accompany the idea of moving that message of freedom. I'm a big advocate of helping people become professional freedom advocates. I've helped many, many people able to put themselves in a position to do this full time, right? You're interested, reach out to me. I'll tell you what I did, right? But we engaged in some methods as entrepreneurs to get involved in the front lines. I didn't want to do this as a side gig. I didn't want to show up at the ballot box every 2 or 4 years and call it done. I didn't want to get on social media, yell and scream and say, I've done my duty. I wanted to do what Franklin and Washington and all of those folks did. On the front lines, all in, all the time, making a difference, so that when I arrived at the end of my life, I said, I gave everything I could. That my children and grandchildren could look back and say, Dad, Granddad gave everything he had. When the chips seemed to be down, he gave everything he had. He didn't just talk about pledging his life, his fortune, and his sacred honor. He gave his life, his fortune, and his sacred honor. And I believe we need more of that. And I believe that entrepreneurship accompanies that idea. I meet so many people that are so passionate about their country, but they're working jobs 50, 60, 70 hours a week, and freedom is getting a little bit of their time. This whole idea of this movement is getting a little bit of their time. I'm sorry, that if we're going to win freedom back, we need people out on the front lines at a high level right now. So let me leave you with a story. I want to leave you with 2 stories as we close this thing out. So there's an individual by the name of 𝗪𝗵𝗲. He lived in the 4th or 5th century, and he was a monk. He was a monk, very, very much reclusive. And he felt one day God telling him to go to Rome. He said, I'm not going to Rome. No, God's telling you, you're going to Rome. No, you must be talking to the wrong guy, because I'm not going to Rome. He knew it was a big city. I'm not going there. You send somebody else there. God says, you're going to Rome, whether you like it or not. So he ends up going to Rome, and he rolls in. And as he arrives in the city, sees the majesty of the city, if you will, but he goes into the Colosseum. And what he sees blows him away. It's people killing other people for sport. It's muscle against muscle, sword against sword. And he's blown away by what he's seeing. It's so surreal to him. And he stands up, if you can imagine, in this Colosseum, he stands up and he says, in the name of Christ, stop this thing. And everybody can hear him. In this amphitheatrical setting, everybody can hear him, including all of royalty. And he says, in the name of Christ, stop this thing. In the name of Christ, forbear. and he would become a comical sideshow. He would go down towards the center of the Colosseum, and he's pulled into the ring by some of the guards. And the people in the crowd start yelling. Like they're just thrilled by what they're watching, and they yell out, "Run him through, run him through." And one thing leads to another, and he's ultimately killed. He's stabbed, and he's laying there bleeding to death. And he says, one more time, in the name of Christ, stop this thing. Forbear. Telemachus died on the grounds of the Colosseum. But as he died, something interesting happened. One person got up in the Colosseum and walked out. And then another. And then another. And then another. Until the Colosseum was empty. And one historian writes this. He says, many other things were brought to bear, but the death of Telemachus crystallized the opposition so that there was never another gladiatorial fight in the Colosseum again. Many other things were brought to bear, but the death of Telemachus crystallized the opposition. There was never another gladiatorial fight in the Colosseum again. It's a true story. My point in sharing that with you is sometimes we can feel overwhelmed that we're only one person. I believe one person with the right ideas that knows how to influence and aligns himself with the right people can create a groundswell. I'm here to tell you that's happening right now throughout the world. I am working with individuals all over the world that are creating groundswell movements in their individual countries. Down in Peru, down in Mexico, up in Canada, over in France, in New Zealand, Australia, Ecuador, Colombia. I'm working with them. And I'm telling you, it's a revolution. It's a peaceful revolution built around the idea of freedom, built around the idea of leadership, built around the idea of influence and impact. Our best days are yet to come. So we have a choice. Our choice is to choose to get involved or just let the chips fall where they may. And my hope is that you'll engage. We'll do this together. I know a lot of you, I don't mean to suggest that you're not. I know many of you are. Whatever you feel called to do, I hope you do it with all your heart, mind, and soul. I hope you pledge your life, your fortune, your sacred honor, and whatever you feel called to do in this freedom battle. And I hope you'll do what our troops did on December 31st, 1776, a story that we don't hear a lot about. You know, we talked about a little bit earlier in this presentation about Washington with his 2,500 troops crossing the Delaware on Christmas Day, 1776. What we often don't talk about is what happened on December 31st, 1776. Their commissions were up. The soldiers, their time was up. They could walk away. And Washington pleads with them. He pleads with them. He says, will you stay but 1 month longer? And he waited for the troops to step forward, and not a one step forward. They were exhausted. They felt like they didn't have the tools that they needed, the instruments that they needed. And so none of them stepped forward. Washington rides off on his horse and comes back sometimes later and pleads with them. Here's what he says. I believe this statement that he says was written for our time, for this very day. He says, my brave fellows, you've done all that I've asked you to do, and more than reasonably can be expected. You've worn yourself out with hardships, and we know not how to spare you. But you've worn yourself out with hardships, and we know not how to spare you. Your country is at stake, your wives, your houses, and all that you hold dear. If you will agree to stay but 1 month longer, you will render a service to the cause of liberty that you could never do under any other circumstance. And of course, one by one steps forward, and they go to work, and they win the revolution, which is the impetus behind what we're able to experience today. And they will be able to experience and render a service to the cause of liberty that many of us envy. Many of us envy. And I believe what's going on right now, in the midst of all the chaos, in the midst of liberty being infringed upon, in the midst of government growing larger, we have an opportunity right now to render a service to the cause of liberty that future generations will look back upon and say, man, what would it have been like to engage in that battle and to ultimately win the battle? That's where we're at. We want you to come run. Let's go engage in liberty together. Many folks have asked, as a result of this little presentation I did here today, are there going to be future presentations? There may be. I've put together scores of hours of courses on anything you can think of pertaining to freedom. That may come around. We'll keep in touch. I know a lot of us follow each other on social media, so we'll hear from I'll let you know what that's going to look like. But I'm engaged. You're engaged. Let's go do this together. This is our time to do something special. And I believe we've been called for such a time as this. Good night.